The first time in my life that somebody handed me a full plate before anybody else at the table, I was 68 years old. It was a Tuesday in March. The plate was white with a thin blue ring around the rim. Chicken, green beans, a roll with the butter already going soft on it. It was warm in my hands, and I sat there in a kitchen that was not mine, across from a woman I had known 11 days, and I could not pick up the fork. She asked me if something was wrong with the food. I said no. I said it looked wonderful. And then I put my hands in my lap and I waited, because waiting was the thing my hands knew how to do. They had learned it a long time before, and hands do not forget. Her name was Barbara. She was my mother-in-law. From November of 1967 until the winter of 1985, at every meal I ate under her roof. Breakfast, dinner, supper, church Sundays, Christmas, 3 funerals, and the morning after my first son was born. Barbara filled my plate last, after her husband, after her sons, after my own children, after the hired boy who came Tuesdays and Fridays, after herself, 18 years. I counted it once on the back of a feed receipt, sitting in a buggy outside a hardware store while Amos was inside buying nails. I am not proud of the counting, but the number I came to was more than 16,000 plates. For most of my life, I believed I knew why she did it. I was wrong. I did not learn the truth until I was 75 years old, and when it came from a woman in a wheelchair who assumed I had known it all along. And she said it in one plain sentence, the way you would tell somebody it looks like rain. I had to hold on to the arm of my chair. Before I go on, let me tell you who I am. My name is Anna. I am 79 years old. I was born Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I lived plain for 68 years of my life. This is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where women like me finally say the things we were never permitted to say out loud. Hannah gave me her chair today because my story is older than hers, and it takes longer to tell. If you want the truth about plain life from women who actually lived it, subscribe and press the like button. And in the comments, tell me one thing. In the house where you grew up, who put the food on the plates? I read every single one. Now, here is what people outside our world do not understand about an Amish table. It is not furniture. It is a map. When I married Amos in November of 1967, 3 weeks after the corn was in, I was 20 years old. My schooling had ended at the end of 8th grade, the way everybody's did. I could cook for 40 people, sew a dress without a pattern, and drive a team. What I could not do was live anywhere except under somebody else's roof, because that is not how it worked. Amos was the youngest son, and in our district the youngest son takes the home place. So the day after our wedding, I moved into his mother's house. 90 acres, a bank barn, and a kitchen with a table that seated 14 when the leaves were in. His parents did not move out to the Dottie house for another 9 years, which means that for 9 years I was a married woman living inside another woman's kitchen, her stove, her pots, her order. The Ordnung, our unwritten rule, governed everything. The width of a hat brim, the color of a buggy top, whether a bicycle was permitted on the road. But the Ordnung had nothing at all to say about who gets served first, because nothing that truly mattered was ever written down. And underneath all of it sat Gelassenheit, yielding, submitting, the giving up of self. A woman is not supposed to want position. She is not supposed to notice position. And she is absolutely never supposed to ask about it, because asking about your own place at a table is Hochmut, pride. And pride was the worst thing you could be in our world. Worse than lazy, worse than angry, worse, I have come to think, than cruel. So here is the arithmetic they handed me. You take a young woman. You put her in another woman's kitchen. You give her no schooling past 14, no money of her own, and no way out. And then you build the whole moral world so that the one question she needs to ask is the one question she is forbidden to ask. That is not an accident. That is a design. The order at that table never changed one time in 18 years. Jonas first, my father-in-law, at the head. Then Amos and his brothers, oldest down to youngest. Then any man who happened to be in the house that day. A hired hand, a harness maker, a boy delivering ice. Then the children, and there came to be 9 of them at that table. Then Mattie, my sister-in-law, on the Sunday she came. Then Barbara, then me. Let me be completely honest with you about something, because this is the part people get wrong when I tell it. She never said one unkind word to me. Not one in 18 years. She never raised her voice. She never criticized my bread. When I lost a baby in 1971, she sat with me on the edge of the bed for 2 hours and never said anything at all, which in our world is the deepest thing a woman can do. And every day, 3 times a day, she filled my plate last. The first morning, I thought it was an accident. The bowl of eggs came around the far side, and by the time it reached me, there was a little rim of them stuck to the sides. I told myself she was nervous, having a new girl in her kitchen. The second day, I thought the same thing. By the end of that first week, I had stopped telling myself anything. The potatoes came to me with the spoon standing straight up in what was left. The chicken came to me, and I learned very quickly to want the parts nobody wants, because wanting them made it easier. Twice in 18 years there was no meat left when the platter reached my hands, and both times I said I wasn't hungry. And both times she nodded and did not look up. So I started cooking more than the family needed, quietly, a quarter more of everything, every meal, so the bottom of the pot would be safe. She watched me do it for years, and she never once said a word about it, and I took that silence as proof of everything I already believed. Here is what people always ask me at this point. They ask whether it happened in front of other people. It happened most in front of other people. When we hosted church, and that was every 8 or 9 weeks, there would be 180 souls fed in shifts off our tables, and I would carry platters for 4 hours and sit down at the very end with whatever was left. When the bishop's wife came for coffee, Barbara filled her cup, and then her own, and then mine. When the deacon's family came for supper in 1974, their 14-year-old boy had his plate in front of him before I had mine. That boy is a grandfather now. He has no idea he is in this story. And in April of 1969, the morning after my first son was born, I lay upstairs in that front bedroom, listening to the whole house eat breakfast beneath me. I heard the chairs. I heard the forks. I heard my father-in-law's voice going on about a fence line. And when Barbara finally came up the stairs with a tray, the eggs on it had gone cold, and I have never once in 57 years been able to decide whether that was because she was cruel or because she had 11 other people to feed and only 1 pair of hands, That is the thing about silence. It never tells you, it just lets you keep guessing for the rest of your life at 3 meals a day. Here is the part I have never been able to get out from under. In 1981, my daughter Lydia was 11 years old, and one evening the bowl of corn came down the table and Barbara handed it across to Lydia before me. And my Lydia stopped. She held that bowl and she looked at me with her forehead all wrinkled up, because even at 11 she knew something was crooked. And I gave her one small shake of my head. One, and she took it, and she filled her plate. That was the night I understood that my children were learning it too, that whatever this was, it was not going to end with me. I want to tell you what I decided it meant, because for 40-some years I was certain. My father had been put in the band for 6 weeks in 1959 over a tractor he was not supposed to have bought. 6 weeks of no one eating at the same table with him, in his own house, with his own family turning their plates. Everybody in 3 districts knew, and when I married into that farm, I was sure as I have ever been about anything, that Barbara had never wanted her youngest son to bring home that man's daughter, that she was too godly to say it and too honest to hide it, that the plate was how she said it. I believed I was a stain that woman had agreed to live with. I told Amos once, in 1981, after the thing with Lydia. I got the whole sentence out, which had taken me 14 years to be able to do. And he was quiet for a while, and then he said, "That's just how Mem does it." And he went out to check the water, and I did not say it out loud again to him or to anybody living for another 12 years. In October of 1985, Barbara had a stroke in the garden, in among the late cabbage. She was 68 years old. We brought her into the front room because she would not go to a hospital, and I nursed her there, and she lived 11 more Sundays. Now here is what nobody prepares you for. For 18 years, that woman had decided when I would eat. For 11 Sundays, I decided when she would. I ground her food fine. I held her chin. I wiped her mouth with a cloth I had hemmed myself. Her right hand did not work anymore, and her speech came out sideways. And mostly what she could still say was Deutsch, our old tongue, the one we spoke at home. And on the 9th Sunday, while I was feeding her broth, with the lamp lit at 2 in the afternoon because the sky had gone dark, she got her left hand up and put it around my wrist. She held it hard, and she looked at me and she said, "Du bist die Letzte." You are the last one, and I want you to understand exactly what I did with that. I finished feeding her. I washed the bowl. I went out onto the back porch in the cold, and I cried into my apron until I could not breathe. Because after 18 years, at the very end of her life, with her one working hand, she had finally said it out loud. That is what I carried. For 37 years, that is what I carried. What happened over the next 11 Sundays, I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Now, I am not going to sugarcoat this next part, because this is where it stops being one woman's sad story and starts being something else. It was not only me. Her name was Rachel Beeler, from the district over. We were at a quilting in the spring of 1993. 8 of us around a frame in a cold front room, and the talk went to mothers-in-law the way it always did. sideways in half sentences, with everybody watching their own stitches. And Rachel said, not looking up, 22 years I ate last in that house. Just that. And she reached for the thread. Nobody around that frame said one word, not one. 6 women, and every one of us went on stitching because that is what we were trained to do with a sentence like that. I found her in the kitchen afterward, and I told her about my own table, and she took hold of both my hands, and she said the saddest thing I have ever heard a woman say. She said, well, at least it's not only me. That was all we had, 2 grown women in a kitchen, and the very best comfort we could give each other was that we were not alone in being despised. Rachel Beeler died in 2009. She was 81 years old, and she went into the ground believing she had been hated for 22 years in the house where she raised 6 children. She was wrong, and she died wrong. And there was nobody on this earth who could have told her, because the one woman who knew had been dead since 1991. 4 years ago, a young woman named Ruth came to see me. She works for a heritage library out in Ohio, recording the kitchen memories of old plain women before we are all gone. She drove me out to a nursing home in Wayne County to sit with a woman named Fanny, who was 94 in a wheelchair in a hallway that smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. Fanny had grown up 2 farms from where I was married. I said it almost as a joke. Old women do that with the things that nearly killed them. I said, in that house I got my plate filled last for 18 years. And Fanny's head came up, and she said, well, sure, that's the keeper's plate. I said, the what? And she looked at me the way you look at somebody who has asked what the sun is. And she said this, and I have not gone 1 week since without hearing it. In them old families, the last plate is the keeper's plate. Company gets served first because company is leaving. Your blood gets served next because your blood grows up and marries out and goes. The last plate is for the one that stays. It's for whoever's going to hold that house when the old woman is under the ground. And she's the only one that ever sees the bottom of the pot. So she's the only one that knows what the family's really got and whether there's enough. You don't hand that to somebody you don't trust with it. That's not the bottom of the table, girl. That's the floor of it. And then she said, didn't your mother-in-law tell you? And I said, no, nobody ever told me anything. And Fanny said, no, they wouldn't have. That'd be pride. Du bist die Letzte. You are the last one. It was not the last insult of her life. It was the closest that woman ever came in 18 years to saying the truest thing she knew about me. And I had had 18 years of practice hearing it the other way. Ruth drove me home. It took 2 hours, and we did not speak for most of them. And somewhere past Millersburg, she said the sentence that I would put on a wall if I were the kind of woman who puts things on walls. She said you weren't being left out. You were being installed. But a kindness that nobody explains does the same work inside a person as a cruelty. The body cannot tell the 2 of them apart. I want to be fair to Barbara now, because I was not fair to her for 37 years, and she is not here to say anything for herself. Barbara was served last by her own mother-in-law for 22 years, in that same kitchen, at that same table. I know that now. She buried 2 children before I ever met her. She was not a cruel woman. She was a mute woman in the only language that would have saved the both of us. She had been handed the last plate as the highest honor a woman in that house could receive. and she had no permission to explain it, because naming a chosen one out loud is pride, and pride would have undone the whole thing. So the system had no word for choosing somebody. It used a spoon instead, and a spoon can be read two ways, and nobody ever told me which one I was holding. I want to be fair to that world too, because it was my world, and I loved a great deal of it. When our barn burned in 1972, there were 200 men on that ground inside of 6 days, and a new barn standing at the end of it, and not one bill in the mail. When my mother died, I did not cook a meal for 3 weeks. That is real. I have never found anything like it since, and I have looked. But there is no scripture that requires a woman to spend 18 years believing she is despised in the house where she is raising her children. There is no ordnung worth that, and there is no holiness anywhere in a silence that let Rachel Baylor go into the ground, still wrong about her own life. Amos died in 2014. I left in the spring of 2015 at 68 years old. The meidung, the shunning, is a quieter thing when you are old. Nobody shouts at a woman of 68. They simply stop writing. 2 of my children still come. The others send a card at Christmas with a name signed and nothing else on it. And I have made my peace with that, mostly, on the good days. I want to tell you what I do now. Every morning, in a small kitchen with an electric stove and a window that faces east, I take down 1 plate. I fill it. I sit down at my own table and I eat first because there is nobody else there, so it should mean nothing at all. It took me 4 years to be able to do that without my hands going still in my lap. If you grew up in a house where you were loved, in a language nobody ever translated for you, I see you. If you spent years reading somebody's silence and reading it wrong, I see you. You were not foolish, and you were not ungrateful. You were doing arithmetic with half the numbers missing, and then you blamed yourself for the answer. And if you are sitting somewhere right now at 70 or 80, thinking it is too late to find out what your own life was actually about, I am 79 years old, and I found out at 75, standing in a hallway that smelled like floor wax. It is not too late. It is only late. Those are not the same thing. Leave me a comment and tell me what part stayed with you. Tell me if there was a spoon in your house too, and if you want more of what has been kept behind the prayer cap, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. I have a great deal more, and at my age I am not saving any of it. The Sundays. What 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The morning is yours if you decide it is.